My wife told me that if I didn't pay $60,000 to fix her face, she'd take half of everything I owned in a divorce. I told her she should have checked the fine print, because while she was dreaming of a new nose, I was making sure she wouldn't have a cent to her name. If you're ready to see a masterclass in how to handle a financial blackmailer and want more stories where the greedy get grounded, you have to subscribe, hit that like button, and comment "justice" below to let me know you're watching. They say that beauty is only skin deep, but in my marriage to Kimberly, it was the only thing that had a price tag. My name is Thomas, and I've spent the last 25 years building a construction empire from a single truck and a toolbox. I have calluses on my hands and a permanent ache in my lower back to prove it. Kimberly, on the other hand, has spent the last decade trying to erase every year we've spent together from her reflection. It started small, a little Botox here, a designer filler there. I didn't mind. I wanted her to feel confident. But as our bank account grew, so did her obsession. She stopped seeing me as a husband and started seeing me as a walking ATM with a limitless daily withdrawal. The woman I married, the one who used to help me count change for pizza, was gone, replaced by someone who looked at her own aging as a personal insult I was responsible for funding. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I had just come home after a grueling day on a job site in the blistering heat. All I wanted was a cold beer and a quiet dinner. Instead, I found Kimberly sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of glossy brochures and a printed invoice that made my vision blur. "I've made the decision, Thomas," she said, not even looking up from her iPad. "I've booked the full package. Rhinoplasty, a deep plane facelift, and the latest body contouring tech. Dr. Sterling says it's a total rejuvenation. It's $64,000, plus the recovery retreat in Sedona." I set my keys down, the metal clinking against the granite. 64,000? Kimberly, we're supposed to be padding the retirement fund. We talked about traveling, maybe buying that cabin in the Ozarks. I'm not spending the price of a luxury SUV, so you can look like a different person. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were colder than the ice in my freezer. There was no love there, just a sharp, calculated entitlement. "I'm an asset, Thomas. Looking like this is part of the lifestyle you've built. If you don't invest in my beauty, what's the point of all that money? I'm 48, and I refuse to look a day over 30. If you won't pay for the surgery, then fine. We'll just get a divorce." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You're threatening me with divorce over a facelift?" "I'm not threatening. I'm stating a fact," she hissed, standing up and leaning across the table. "If we divorce, I get half of the business, half of the house, and a massive alimony check. That's a hell of a lot more than $60,000, isn't it? So, be a smart businessman, Thomas. Pay the doctor, or pay the lawyers. Either way, that money is leaving your pocket. I'd suggest you choose the option where you still have a pretty wife to show off at the Christmas party." She swept out of the room, leaving the invoice on the table like a ransom note. I sat there in the silence of the home I had built for us, realization dawning on me. She wasn't just my wife anymore. She was a predator. She had spent years watching the books, knowing exactly how much I was worth, and now she was holding our history hostage for a surgical upgrade. But Kimberly made one fatal mistake. She assumed that because I was a blue-collar guy, I didn't know how to play the long game. She thought I was the same man she could manipulate with a pout and a cold shoulder. She didn't realize that in the world of high-stakes construction, I deal with sharks and blackmailers every single day. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It wasn't a plastic surgeon. It was a trust and estate attorney who specialized in asset protection. "Hey, Bill," I said, my voice steady. "Remember that conversation we had about the family irrevocable trust? The one that moves the company and the real estate into a protected vehicle for my kids and my sisters? Yeah, I want the papers ready by Friday. Every asset I have. Move it all." Kimberly wanted a divorce. She was going to get one. But she was about to find out that half of everything equals exactly zero when you're married to a man who has nothing left to lose. The following 3 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I acted like a man who had been defeated, which was exactly what Kimberly wanted to see. I watched her swan around the house, humming to herself as she packed for her pre-surgery consultation in Beverly Hills. She was already treating my hard-earned money as her personal spoils of war. "I'm glad you're being sensible, Thomas," she said over breakfast on Thursday, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that turned my stomach. It's better for everyone this way. You keep your dignity, and I keep my youth. It's a win-win. I'm just looking at the numbers, Kimberly, I replied, staring into my black coffee. Like you said, it's just business. She didn't notice the bags under my eyes or the fact that I had been at my attorney's office until midnight. Bill, my lawyer, had been clinical and brilliant. Because I had built the construction company before our marriage, and because our state laws allowed for the restructuring of non-marital and commingled assets into family trusts under specific conditions, we had a window. I wasn't hiding money. I was legally gifting my lifetime of work to an irrevocable trust for my children from my first marriage and my aging parents. The house, the heavy machinery, the liquid capital, and even my vintage car collection, they were no longer mine. Legally, I was now just an employee of the trust with a modest salary. I was becoming paper poor while staying asset rich for the people who actually loved me. Oh, and Thomas? Kimberly added, pausing at the door with a designer shopping bag. I've decided to add the neck lift and the eyelid surgery. It's another $12,000, but Dr. Sterling says it's essential for a cohesive look. I put the deposit on our joint credit card this morning. Consider it handled, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was already planning to cancel that card the moment the divorce papers were served. That afternoon, I met Bill in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. He handed me a thick, manila envelope. It's done, Thomas. The trust is funded, the deeds are transferred, and the signatures are notarized. As of 2 hours ago, you are technically a man of very limited means. If she files for divorce today, she's chasing a ghost. But are you sure you want to go through with this? Once the trust is irrevocable, you can't just take it back if you change your mind about her. I looked out the window at a construction site across the street. I saw a young man hauling lumber, the same way I used to. He looked exhausted but proud. I thought about Kimberly, who hadn't worked a day in 20 years, threatening to dismantle that man's entire legacy for a tighter jawline. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Bill, I said. She didn't just ask for surgery, she asked for my soul. She told me she was an asset. Well, it's time to show her what happens when an asset gets liquidated. I went home and found Kimberly in the master bedroom, surrounded by expensive recovery pillows and silk pajamas she'd bought for her post-op stay. She looked at me with a smirk. Did you call the bank to authorize the wire transfer for the surgery? The office needs it by noon tomorrow, or I lose my slot. I have something even better than a wire transfer, I said, reaching into my briefcase. I have the finality you were looking for. I didn't hand her a check. I handed her a document titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Kimberly's face went through a fascinating transformation. The smug satisfaction vanished, replaced by a momentary flash of confusion, and then a jagged, ugly rage. She snatched the papers from my hand, her manicured nails nearly tearing the parchment. What is this? Are you joking? She screamed, her voice hitting a high, shrill note that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. You're divorcing me? I told you I'd take half. I'll take the house, Thomas. I'll take the company. You'll be living in a trailer by the time my lawyers are done with you. I don't think you read the second page, Kimberly, I said, leaning against the doorframe. You see, there's been some restructuring. The house. It's not mine. The company? Not mine. The money you've been eyeing? It's already gone. You wanted to play the invest in me or I leave game. Well, I decided to invest in my future instead. And surprisingly, you aren't in it. She looked at the papers again, her eyes darting across the legal jargon. This is illegal. You can't just give away our money. It wasn't our money, Kim. It was the company's capital. And I have every right to plan for my children's inheritance. You wanted to be a smart businesswoman. So tell me, what's half of nothing? She lunged at me, the silk pajamas fluttering like the wings of a trapped bird. But the real blow hadn't even landed yet. She still thought she had a roof over her head. She had no idea that the home she was standing in was about to become very, very temporary. Kimberly's scream was so primal it sounded like something was breaking inside her. She threw the divorce papers at my face, the white sheets fluttering to the floor like defeated birds. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can hide behind your lawyers and your trusts? This is a community property state, Thomas. I've been your wife for 15 years. No judge is going to let you leave me with nothing while you sit on a mountain of construction gold. I'm not sitting on anything, Kim. I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. I'm an employee. I have a salary, a modest one at that. The gold you're talking about belongs to my children and the legacy I spent my life building. The legacy you tried to use as a bargaining chip for a new face. You wanted to treat our marriage like a hostile takeover. Well, consider the company restructured. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her circle of friends. The same women who spent their afternoons comparing diamond carats and Botox providers. I'm calling a lawyer. I'm calling the best one in the city. You'll be lucky if you keep that truck you're so proud of. Go ahead, I said, gesturing to the door. But before you spend a retainer you don't have, you might want to check the notice to vacate I included in those papers. You see, since the house now belongs to the family trust, and you are no longer a guest of the trust's beneficiaries, your residency has been terminated. You have 48 hours to pack your things. And just so there's no confusion, I've already taken the liberty of booking you a room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, plastic key card. I tossed it onto the bed, right next to her $60 silk eye mask. It's the Sunset Motor Inn down by the interstate. It's clean, it's cheap, and most importantly, it's exactly what I'm willing to pay for. It's a far cry from the Sedona Recovery Retreat, but I think the old you will fit in just fine there. Kimberly stared at the key card as if it were a piece of radioactive waste. The reality of the situation was finally starting to bleed through her denial. She looked around the master suite, the custom walk-in closets filled with shoes she'd never worn twice, the heated marble floors, the view of the valley. She realized the walls were closing in. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. The rage was being replaced by a frantic, jagged desperation. Thomas, look at me. I'm your wife. I've stood by you. I just wanted to feel beautiful again. Is that such a crime? I was scared of getting old. I was scared you wouldn't want me anymore. It was a masterclass in manipulation, the sudden shift from predator to victim. 3 years ago, it might have worked. But I had seen her eyes when she told me I was too poor for her ambitions during our last fight. I had seen the contempt she held for the very work that paid for her luxury. You weren't scared I wouldn't want you, Kim, I said, stepping toward her. You were scared the world wouldn't envy you. You didn't want to be beautiful for me. You wanted to be a trophy that I had to keep paying to polish. Well, I'm retired from the trophy business. I'd rather have a woman with wrinkles who knows the value of $1 than a woman with a plastic face who only knows how to spend mine. I walked to the closet and pulled out a large, battered suitcase, the one I use for my fishing trips. I set it on the bed with a heavy thud. Start packing. I've already contacted the credit card companies. Your secondary cards have been deactivated. The lease on your Range Rover? It's a company vehicle, and the company is picking it up tomorrow morning. I've left a bus pass on the kitchen counter for you. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I'll fight you for every penny, Thomas. I'll make sure the whole town knows what a monster you are. I'll tell everyone you left your wife in the street. Tell them whatever you want, I said, turning my back on her. But while you're telling your story, remember this. I offered you a life of comfort and a peaceful retirement. You're the one who put a price tag on our marriage. You wanted $60,000 for a facelift? Congratulations. You just spent your entire inheritance on a surgeon's consultation you can no longer afford. As I walked out of the room, I heard the sound of her expensive crystal perfume bottles shattering against the door. She was throwing a tantrum, but for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel the need to go back and fix it. I had a different kind of construction to focus on now, rebuilding a life where my worth wasn't measured by the quality of my wife's surgeon. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls and desperate power plays that all led to dead ends. Kimberly called every high-profile attorney in the county, but the response was always the same. Mr. Miller's assets are locked in a pre-existing family structure that predates your demands. There is no liquid capital to sue for. By the second morning, the reality of her situation had finally sunk in. The trophy wife was now just a woman with a mountain of designer luggage and nowhere to put it. I watched from the driveway as a tow truck arrived to take back the Range Rover. Kimberly stood on the porch, her face pale and devoid of the expensive makeup she usually wore. Without the mask of her arrogance, she looked every bit her age, and honestly, she looked better that way, though she'd never believe it. She was clutching a cardboard box, the last of her vanity items, while a rideshare vehicle pulled up to the curb. Not a limousine, not a luxury sedan, just a beat-up compact car that was going to take her to the Sunset Motor Inn. "This isn't over, Thomas," she spat as she walked past me, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. "You think you've won because you moved some numbers around on a screen? You're still just a dirty construction worker. You'll die alone in this big house with nothing but your legacy to keep you warm." "I might be a dirty construction worker, Kim," I replied, leaning against my old work truck. "But I'm a man who owns his soul. You're a woman who traded hers for a dream of staying 30 forever. Good luck at the motel. I hear the continental breakfast is almost as good as the one in Sedona." She climbed into the back of the rideshare without another word, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. As the car pulled away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The silence that followed wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. Because I had moved the assets into an irrevocable trust for my children and parents, and because Kimberly had documented her own financial blackmail in texts and emails, the judge saw her for exactly what she was. She walked away with a small, one-time settlement that barely covered her credit card debt and a few months of rent. I heard she moved into a tiny apartment across town and took a job at a high-end department store, selling the very perfume she used to buy by the crate. Every day, she has to look at women who have the life she threw away, and every day, she sees her old face in the mirror, reminded of the price of her greed. I didn't stay in the big house. I sold it through the trust and moved into that cabin in the Ozarks I'd always dreamed of. I spend my days fishing, working with my hands, and seeing my kids every weekend. I don't miss the galas, the designer labels, or the constant pressure to fund a fantasy. I learned that the most beautiful thing a person can own isn't a flawless face. It's a life that doesn't need a surgeon to make it worth living. Author's conclusion. The tragedy of Kimberly's story is that she already had everything she needed to be happy, but she was blinded by the reflection of a life she thought she deserved. When you start treating your partner as a financial instrument rather than a human being, you shouldn't be surprised when they decide to close the account. Thomas didn't ruin her. He simply stopped subsidizing her delusions. In the end, beauty fades, but the consequences of your choices are permanent. If you found this story of a husband's ultimate counterstrike satisfying, make sure to subscribe for more tales of justice. Hit that like button and comment below. Would you have protected your assets the same way Thomas did? Let us know.